This video is the second in a series of franchise reviews covering the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you haven't already watched the previous video, where I discussed Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, and Iron Man 2, you should do so before watching this video. The inaugural entry in this new Marvel Cinematic Universe was the 2008 film Iron Man. The film not only successfully established the Iron Man franchise, and by extension the MCU, but also the viability of Marvel Studios. The second entry in the MCU, released barely a month later, was The Incredible Hulk. Ultimately, The Incredible Hulk wasn't as strong a film as Iron Man. However, if you have the time, or you're a completionist like me, it's definitely worth checking out, or even having in your collection. 2009 remains the only year since the commencement of the MCU in which no new film was released. However, the following year saw the release of the highly anticipated sequel, Iron Man 2. The first Iron Man film was far more successful than anyone had expected. As such, expectations for the sequel were incredibly high. There are a number of reasons why the film ultimately fell short. That being said, it certainly isn't a bad film. Unlike the first two MCU films, whose post-credit scenes had merely teased things to come, Iron Man 2 includes actual footage from Marvel's next release, Thor. Thor introduces the cosmic side of the MCU. Many viewers were skeptical of a space fantasy set in the same grounded universe as Iron Man. Perhaps anticipating this apprehension, Marvel eased into the more fantastical elements of the narrative.
Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science. Well, I come from a place where they're one and the same thing.
Somewhat surprisingly, the film was directed by Academy Award nominee Sir Kenneth Branagh, who is perhaps best known for his various Shakespeare adaptations. Branagh directed Thor as a Shakespearean drama, full of romance, betrayal, comedy, and tragedy, set amongst the stars and in the New Mexico desert. Patrick Doyle's score also helps give the film an appropriate sense of gravitas, and is, in my opinion, one of the more underrated MCU soundtracks. The film grounds its larger-than-life characters by exploring their humanity. Casting the titular hero involved a long list of potential actors, including Tom Hiddleston, who was instead cast as Loki. The role eventually went to Australian actor Chris Hemsworth. Not the first Aussie to play an iconic Marvel character. Thor begins the film as a brash warrior, with a temper that could potentially rival the Hulk. While he claims to act for the good of Asgard, he is in fact simply chasing glory. In fact, come to think of it, Thor's arc initially resembles that of Simba from The Lion King.
Simba, I'm very disappointed in you.
I know.
You could have been killed. You deliberately disobeyed me. And what's worse, you put Nala in danger.
Thor, Odin's son, you have betrayed the express command of your king. Through your arrogance and stupidity, you've opened these peaceful realms and innocent lives to the horror and desolation of war!
However, after being banished to Earth and stripped of his power, he eventually learns humility and, quite literally, proves his worth. Hemsworth certainly looks the part. While he gives a strong performance, the script doesn't exactly give him the opportunity to use the full range of his acting talent. Natalie Portman's Jane Foster becomes Thor's main point of contact on Earth, as well as his love interest. While Hemsworth and Portman have decent on-screen chemistry, the relationship is hardly one of cinema's greatest romances. The standout character is easily Thor's adopted brother Loki. Despite his villainous turn, Hiddleston manages to make the God of Mischief a sympathetic character.
I never wanted the throne! I only ever wanted to be your equal.
I always find myself feeling really bad for Loki whenever I watch this film.
I could have done it, Father! I could have done it! For you! For all of us!
No, Loki.
Loki is in fact so charismatic he all but eclipses the film's actual antagonist, Laufey, played by Colm Feore. The King of the Frost Giants is ultimately a pretty forgettable villain. It's worth noting the younger versions of Thor and Loki, played by Dakota Goyo and Ted Allpress, do a great job in their limited amount of screen time. Unfortunately, many of the supporting characters, such as Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, aren't really given a lot to do. Similarly, Jane's associates Eric Selvig and Darcy Lewis, played by Stellan Skarsgård and Kat Dennings, provide little more than exposition and comic relief. Anthony Hopkins gives an underrated performance as Odin, expertly judging when to hold back and when to unleash the Allfather's rage.
You're thinking only as a warrior.
This was an act of war.
It was the act of but a few, doomed to fail.
Look how far they got.
We will find the breach in our defenses, and it will be sealed.
As king of Asgard.
But you're not king! Not yet.
Phil Coulson, or as Thor refers to him,
Son of Cole.
appears once again. This film also introduces Maximiliano Hernandez as Jasper Sitwell, who would go on to become a recurring character throughout the MCU. People often forget this film actually features the first brief appearance of Jeremy Renner as Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye.
You want me to slow him down, sir? Or are you sending in more guys for him to beat up?
As I mentioned previously, the post-credits scene from Iron Man 2 included footage from this film. However, the scene is edited together slightly differently. If you've ever wondered what Coulson got up to between Iron Man 2 and Thor, you should watch the Marvel one-shot, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer. Agent Sitwell makes reference to Tony Stark after the Destroyer arrives on Earth.
Is that one of Stark's?
I don't know.
Funnily enough, Stark did actually build an Iron Man armor based off the Destroyer during the comic book crossover event Fear Itself. During one scene, Selvig alludes to Bruce Banner.
I knew the scientist, the pioneer in gamma radiation. S.H.I.E.L.D. showed up and, he wasn't heard from again.
There is also a nod to Thor's comic book alter ego, Dr. Donald Blake.
Sir?
Puente Antiguo, the name of the fictional town where the Bifrost sends Thor, translates as Old Bridge in Spanish. Those scenes were filmed at the Cerro Pelon Ranch in New Mexico. The set was originally built for the 1985 western Silverado. While perhaps not the most memorable offering, this is an entertaining film with some likeable characters, and serves as a solid introduction to a whole new side of the MCU. The film's post-credits scene set up several elements of the then-upcoming crossover, The Avengers, such as Loki's return and Selvig's involvement with S.H.I.E.L.D. and Project Pegasus. It also gave viewers their first glimpse of the Tesseract. Of course, the as-yet unidentified Infinity Stone also featured prominently in the intervening film, Captain America: The First Avenger. After 4 contemporary offerings, this film delves into the MCU's history, with the bulk of the action taking place from 1942 to 1945. The film's historical setting was not only welcome, but necessary. Captain America's origins are inescapably tied to World War II, both in fiction and reality. This move also provided an opportunity to introduce certain other characters associated with that period of Marvel history, such as the Howling Commandos. Much like Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans completely embodies the role of Steve Rogers. Incidentally, Evans' second Marvel role. The earnestness of Evans' performance endears viewers to the character prior to him being given the super soldier serum. The film does a fantastic job establishing Steve as a heroic character before he actually becomes Captain America.
Twin Ward. Guts.
Grenade!
Get away! Get back!
Haley Atwell's Peggy Carter is a brilliantly strong character who easily holds her own without sacrificing her femininity. The romance which develops between her and Steve is both natural and believable. The strength of their connection is largely what makes Steve's sacrifice at the end of the film so tragic.
I gotta put her in the water.
Please, don't do this. We have time. We can work it out.
Right now, I'm in the middle of nowhere. If I wait any longer, a lot of people are gonna die. Peggy. This is my choice.
Seriously, I feel like people don't talk enough about just how sad the end of this film actually is.
You gonna be okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I just... I had a date.
The film also does a great job establishing the relationship between Steve and his childhood best friend, Bucky Barnes.
Don't do anything stupid until I get back.
How can I? Taking all the stupid with you.
You're a punk.
Jerk. Careful.
It is fun to see their dynamic change once Steve is given the serum.
I thought you were dead. I thought you were smaller.
This film introduced Dominic Cooper as the third actor to portray Howard Stark in the MCU, following both Gerard Sanders and John Slattery. Cooper plays a younger version of the character, a role he has since reprised in both the Marvel one-shot Agent Carter and the television series of the same name. Cooper's performance shows that despite their differences, Tony Stark and his father were both cut from the same cloth. The film also reveals it was Howard who created Cap's iconic shield for him, which perhaps explains why a prototype ended up in the Stark mansion in the chronologically later Iron Man films. Tommy Lee Jones' Colonel Phillips is another underrated MCU character. Jones's performance is beautifully underplayed. The film's antagonist, Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, is played by Hugo Weaving. While the character appears somewhat cartoonish, Weaving masterfully keeps his performance from ever going fully over the top. Laura Haddock appears briefly as Autograph Seeker. Haddock later appeared in both Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 as Meredith Quill, the mother of Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord.
Who? Star-Lord, man. Legendary outlaw.
As such, her character in this film was retroactively made Peter's grandmother. The film features some truly incredible visual effects, most notably Steve's pre-serum physique, or Skinny Steve. This process was achieved using a number of techniques, the final result looking flawless. Unfortunately, not every effect is as seamless. There is some distractingly noticeable green screen work throughout. The emotional impact of Bucky's apparent demise is slightly hampered by somewhat questionable visuals. Joe Johnston was chosen to direct this film partly based on his experience with period films, such as October Sky and The Rocketeer. Funnily enough, The Rocketeer focuses on a character who more closely resembles Iron Man. The film is cheesy in all the right ways. Much like its titular character, you can't help but admire its sincerity.
Hey! Let's hear it for Captain America!
Composer Alan Silvestri produced a score which highlights the adventurous and heroic nature of the film. One particular musical highlight is the era-appropriate song Star Spangled Man, written by David Zappel and Alan Menken. Performed by the fictional Star Spangled Singers, the extravagant musical number sounds charmingly authentic. While every comic book movie includes references to the source material, this film actually includes a slightly modified version of Captain America Comics #1. The film also includes several direct links to Thor.
The Tesseract was the jewel of Odin's treasure room.
The Norwegian village which Schmidt attacks early in the film is the same location where the Asgard battled the Frost Giants in 965 AD. Howard Stark's prototype flying car would later reappear in the television series Agent Carter. The technology would later become standard issue for S.H.I.E.L.D. vehicles, though it is susceptible to damage.
Initiate vertical takeoff!
Flight systems damaged.
Activate guidance cameras!
The film also includes nods to other non-Marvel films, such as the Indiana Jones franchise.
And the Führer digs for trinkets in the desert.
Director Joe Johnston had served as art director on Raiders of the Lost Ark. While driving Schmidt's car, the button Colonel Phillips presses in order to catch the Valkyrie is marked K, a nod to Jones's character in the Men in Black films.
You remember the little red button? Yeah. Push the little red button.
This was the first MCU film to include a subtitle, and the first Avenger was clearly chosen in part to build hype for the then upcoming crossover. The film's post-credits scene actually consists of footage from the Avengers, as well as an actual trailer for the film. Not unlike the ending of Back to the Future Part 2. However, as with every entry in the MCU, the priority was to make a good film, and to introduce a beloved character to a new audience. Marvel Studios continued to defy expectations with this film, taking one of their cheesiest creations and delivering an action-packed adventure with a surprising amount of heart. With 5 of the 6 core members established, and Hawkeye present, I guess, it was finally time for Earth's mightiest heroes to assemble on the big screen, in the crossover event, The Avengers. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, the film's title was changed to Avengers Assemble, in order to avoid confusion with the British television series The Avengers. This film was the culmination of Marvel's vision for the MCU. While crossover films had been done before, most examples were either versus battles or comedy mashups of previously unrelated properties. Nothing like this had ever been attempted. Incidentally, The Avengers is another of my top 5 favourite films. If you're wondering why there are 6, you should watch my video on the 2009 Star Trek film. The first hour of the film is often criticised for being slow-paced. However, I believe this was done deliberately, in order to build anticipation as each hero is introduced and the various characters begin to meet.
Mr. Stark. Captain.
The film does maintain momentum, though not at the expense of the moment. Whenever it slows down, it's for a reason. According to director Joss Whedon, the original cut of the film was over 3 hours long. Imagine a 3-hour-long Avengers film. One sequence which was ultimately cut focused more heavily on Steve Rogers struggling to adjust to the modern world. This would be explored more in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. The film is tightly edited, with each scene naturally leading into the next, especially early on.
Is there anything you can tell us about the Tesseract that we ought to know now?
You should have left it in the ocean.
It's pretty much a cliche at this point, but this film looks like a comic book come to life. It is incredibly exciting to see these characters sharing the screen for the very first time. Everyone who worked on this film clearly understood the significance of what they were creating. There's a reason the iconic rotating shot of the assembled Avengers is still used at every opportunity. Before this film, that kind of image only existed on the page. Marvel Studios successfully brought that same level of spectacle to the big screen. Whedon was a perfect choice to direct this film, given his experience with large ensemble casts. Each character brings with them the energy and tone from their own films.
Agent Romanoff, you miss me?
Their initial conflicts feel both natural and organic.
Do not touch me again.
Then don't take my stuff.
If the film hadn't addressed the characters' clashing personalities, their eventual team-up would have felt unearned. The conflicting ideologies of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers make their dynamic especially interesting.
You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
I think I would just cut the wire.
This relationship would become a central part of the MCU moving forward. Whedon did a fantastic job balancing the group, ensuring each character got their time in the spotlight. It's a credit to casting director Sarah Finn the cast all play off each other so well. Of course, we do need to address the large green elephant in the room, the recasting of Bruce Banner. Originally, Edward Norton was set to reprise the role. However, when negotiations between him and Marvel broke down, Mark Ruffalo took over. Ruffalo had actually been considered for the role in The Incredible Hulk, before Norton was cast. Ruffalo retained the hesitance of Norton's portrayal, while still making the role his own. The film makes it clear this was not another full reboot of the character, as Banner acknowledges the events of The Incredible Hulk.
You know, you should come by Stark Tower sometime. Top 10 floors, all R&D. You'd love it. It's Candyland.
Thanks, but the last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem.
The transformation sequence was greatly improved for this film, ditching the body horror without losing the sense of terror. Given her limited screen time in Iron Man 2, this film took the opportunity to explore Black Widow's motivations in greater depth.
It's really not that complicated. I got red in my ledger. I'd like to wipe it out.
Hawkeye remains the most underdeveloped member of the team, spending much of the film under the influence of the Mind Stone. However, his contributions to the climactic battle earn him his place on the team. With so much of the film focused on establishing the titular superhero team, it made sense to use a pre-established villain who viewers were already familiar with. Loki was the perfect choice. Not only did this mirror the Avengers comic book debut, it also makes Thor's position within the team more interesting.
I've care how you speak. Loki is beyond reason, but he is of Asgard, and he is my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
Whedon brings his signature quippy dialogue to the film's script, injecting a lot of humour into the team's interactions. Robert Downey Jr. reportedly improvised many of Tony's most memorable lines.
That man is playing Galaga. Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
Having played a supportive role in several prior films, S.H.I.E.L.D. finally takes centre stage in this film, giving Nick Fury a chance to demonstrate his leadership skills.
Director Fury, the Council has made a decision.
I recognize the Council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it.
The film also introduces Nick Fury's right-hand woman, Maria Hill, played by How I Met Your Mother star Kobe Smulders. Tragically, the event which finally causes the heroes to put aside their differences and unite is the death of beloved character Phil Coulson.
It's okay, boss. This was never gonna work. They didn't have something to...
Coulson was later brought back in the television series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
I'm clearance level 6. I know that Agent Coulson was killed in action before the battle in New York. Got the full report.
Welcome to level 7.
Without spoiling anything for those who still haven't watched the series, though seriously, you should, the character's resurrection isn't treated as a cheap gimmick, and is given the weight it deserves. The cellist, referred to multiple times throughout the film, actually appears in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode, The Only Light in the Darkness. Originally, Whedon had intended not to include any supporting characters from the previous films, in order to isolate the heroes and force them to rely on each other. However, he ultimately brought back Eric Selvig, Pepper Potts, and Jarvis. Coulson also mentions Jane Foster to Thor.
As soon as Loki took the doctor, we moved Jane Foster. You've got an excellent observatory in Tromsø. She was asked to consult there very suddenly yesterday. Handsome fee, private plane, very remote. She'll be safe.
Thank you.
The notable absence of War Machine is explained in the Iron Man 3 Prelude comic. Following his work on Captain America the First Avenger, Alan Silvestri also composed the score for the Avengers. He reused elements of his score from the First Avenger where appropriate, though it would have been nice to hear him incorporate music from some of the other films too. Nevertheless, Silvestri's score is epic. One particular cue always reminds me of John Williams' score from Star Wars Episode II: Attack of the Clones. Of course, the track that everyone remembers is simply and definitively titled The Avengers. There is a reason it has become the most recognisable piece of music in the MCU. At one point, Tony makes a throwaway joke about life model decoys.
You have reached the life model decoy of Tony Stark. Please leave a message.
This is urgent.
Then leave it urgently.
LMD technology ultimately featured prominently in the 4th season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The film's mid-credits scene famously features the first appearance of the Mad Titan Thanos, played not by Josh Brolin, but instead by Damien Poitier. At this point, Marvel hadn't yet mapped out the Infinity Saga, and the character's inclusion was actually suggested by Whedon as a fun Easter egg for fans. The Battle of New York has become one of the central defining moments of the MCU, if not the defining moment, even surpassing Tony Stark's climactic declaration.
I am Iron Man.
The repercussions of this event have been felt far and wide, in both subsequent films and television series. This film had the impossible task of serving as a satisfying continuation of 4 separate film series, delivering a cohesive and entertaining narrative in its own right, and establishing the future of the MCU, and somehow managed to deliver on every front. Subsequent films may have surpassed the Avengers in terms of scale and number of characters, but that doesn't diminish the groundbreaking achievements of this film. While the Avengers marked the end of Phase 1, this was just the beginning of the MCU.
What is Phase 2?
Given Iron Man had kicked off Phase 1, and by extension the entire MCU, Marvel chose to begin Phase 2 with Iron Man 3. I will be covering the first half of Phase 2 in a future franchise reviews video, so make sure you check that out. In the meantime, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this franchise in the comments. Let me know which of these 3 films is your favourite and why. If you liked this video, why not give it a thumbs up? Maybe share it with a friend. Or an enemy. Either way, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to see more content here on Channel 73.